Hey guys, it's actually me. Want to spend a few minutes with you today and tell you a little bit about our chapter and some thoughts that I have, particularly in regard to separation of church and state and the clause in the First Amendment that deals with this. It is an issue our country continues to struggle with, but I want to give you a little bit of history, and I'm not finding a whole lot of TED Talks or YouTube videos on this that are not particularly slanted to an evangelical point of view, which basically says we get to run whatever we want to run because we're Christian. And I don't want us to have that opportunity or understanding in this class. You have to really realize that church and state separation comes from our own experience as early colonists in America. The other video, excuse me, I apologize for that video. The woman who does it's particularly boring, but it does show how incredibly enmeshed religion and state really, really were, to the point where bishops ended up acting as sort of governors for their area. And so a bishop's child could grow up to become bishop and inherit everything they had, run over anyone that got in their way, have all the money, all the land, all the power that they inherited by their birthright as the child of a priest or bishop. This is the reason now why, after 1,000 years, priests are now considered to be celibate, because that broke that system. Celibacy is not a theological tool. It's more a practical tool. And so we'll talk about that later. What happened in England, particularly, Henry VIII became the leader of the church. He crowned himself the head of the church. He was actually named by Pope Gregory, the defender of the faith. And so the English pietists, the separatists, the Puritans, as they became known, were particularly oppressed by the Church of England. You could not be a Christian if you were not a part of the Church of England. And so the only option they had was to go to the New World and begin a free place where they could worship without restriction, without restraint, or without government intervention. Now, a lot of the evangelical videos that are out there about church and state will tell you this is what church and state really is. It's to protect the church from the state, not to protect the state from the church. That is very true. However, the irony of it is when the Puritans came to America, if you've studied 17th century American history, they ended up creating a system in which the church ran the government. And so they ended up recreating exactly what they ran from in England. And so the court system was run by men, only men of Puritan faith. And so if you disagree with them, if you didn't live according to the shining city on a hill example of Puritanism, you were burnt at the stake, you were drowned, you were stoned according to the biblical mandate. So today it is a two-way street. The question is whether the church has a right to be involved in politics or whether they should stay out and totally be separate from the political arena. There's a misnomer out there that churches cannot be political. Yes, they can be political. I would argue as a pastor that they should be political. Jesus was, as a Christian, I can say Jesus was political. That's why they killed him. If he had kept his mouth shut, he would have lived. He challenged the oppressive political systems of his day. The problem is that churches cannot show favoritism in politics, and that's a very, very different argument. I have a right as a pastor to make political statements. I'm going to be offensive now, and I apologize, but as a Christian pastor, I am very blunt about the fact that this present administration, particularly the man in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, does not reflect the compassion, kindness, integrity, grace, and mercy of Jesus Christ in any way, shape, or form. Any Christian who says that Donald Trump reflects Jesus has never met Jesus. I have a right to say that. I'm a Christian pastor. I think I have an opportunity and obligation to say that as a man of faith. Now, that being said, I cannot tell my people how to vote. I tell them to vote. I tell them to be informed. I tell them to vote their conscience. I cannot tell them how to vote. I can have political forums in my church, but I cannot have just my side of the argument. All of them have to be invited. I can't put out brochures that say that one side or the other is favored. That would be illegal. Churches are tax exempt because we are nonprofits. Some people have a problem with that. Let me address that for you. Churches are tax exempt because we fulfill a particular social role that government does not. That's why we're allowed to be tax exempt. It's so that the money we put into taxes can go for the social agencies that churches support. Some folks say that church should not be tax exempt, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I'll be really honest. If you want to not exempt churches from taxes, it's cheaper for me, and frankly, it's easier. But then you're going to have to step up and do your part when it comes to opening your home for Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and after-school programs and 12-step programs and homeless shelters and cold weather shelters and food pantries. And you're going to have to be the ones working at the nursing homes and the hospitals and running the schools and the orphanages and taking care of the all the programs for at-risk people and after-school programs and basketball programs and all the things to keep kids off the streets. You're going to be the one to run AA and PFLAG and NA and all the things that happen in my church every single night. So if y'all want to tax exempt churches and take that away and tax us, please do, because that just makes my job a whole lot easier. We are tax exempt so that we can do the jobs that the rest of people really don't want to do. Let's just be honest. Now, a tax exempt status can be revoked legally, and in my opinion, should be revoked legally if a church takes on the role of political lobbying agency. When a church invites one president to speak, but not others, okay, if they favor one party over another, they become a lobbying agency. When a church, if I, for instance, as a progressive liberal pastor, start talking about social issues in a political context and have social forums or political forums that only talk about my side of the story, I now cease being a church and I become a political entity, and I need to lose my tax exempt status. What we have today, in my opinion, is a variety of Christian churches that are acting as political lobbying agencies, and they're losing or should be losing their tax exempt status, but of course they're not going to because those in power agree with their message. Now, here's one of the questions. The Religious Freedom Act that was signed in May 2018 by this current president says that people of particular faiths can use that faith as a reason to stop or cease service to other groups that offend their faith sensibilities. For instance, an evangelical church won't host a gay wedding. They shouldn't be able to. They shouldn't have to. You have a right as a Christian, as a Jew, as a Muslim, as a Baha'i, as a Hindu, as a Sikh, as a pagan, to your particular religious views. You have every single right to believe what you believe and practice that within the confines of your church community. But an evangelical baker who refuses to bake a cake for a gay wedding, that's a different story. What you're saying is, as a for-profit business, you have a right to apply your particular religious sensitivities to your business. You are not a nonprofit, you are a for-profit business, and that becomes, in many people's opinions, prejudice. That particularly is skewed toward bigotry. Catholic schools will not provide particular healthcare benefits if they go against their moral teaching. For instance, abortion services or reproductive services. That's very true. And honestly, as a pastor, I think that is right. I don't agree with it, but that's not my church. It's not my decision. It's theirs. But they have as much of a right to live with their convictions in their community of faith as I have to live with mine. But here's the question. Hobby Lobby was afforded by the Supreme Court the status of religious conviction when they sued because they will not, as Christian owners, will not offer reproductive rights in their insurance benefits to their female employees. A woman who works for Hobby Lobby does not have a right to certain reproductive services, and we're talking not abortion, but actual birth control, because their particular owners of their company have religious beliefs that believe that's wrong. Now, separation of church and state, in my mind, clearly says that's not legal. The Supreme Court has said it is. Okay? I think that's an issue. For me personally, if you're a church, you're a church. If you're a for-profit company, you're a for-profit company. Back in 2015, there was a pizza place in Indiana when then Governor Mike Pence, now Vice President, was rallying against gay marriage and wanted to have Religious Freedom Act so that Christians wouldn't have to support flower shops or bakeries or restaurants, would not have to support gay weddings. a pizza place became very popular, very, very famous rather, because they were very open in saying they were not going to support gay marriage. They did not believe in it. They were Christians, and that their pizza place would never provide pizza for a gay wedding. That's their right. As a business, that becomes a problem. You have a right to your religious conviction. If you're a nonprofit with a religious institution behind you, you have a right. But when you're a for-profit business, quite frankly, is that any different than saying that white people can sit at one counter and black people can sit at another? Just putting that out there for you to think about, because part of this course is to challenge you to think critically about these issues. Maybe you'll agree with me, maybe you won't, and you're perfectly fine to disagree with me. But my job is to challenge you to think about these things in a new way. A business is not a church. The owner can have religious convictions, but a for-profit business, for a lot of people, should not. The problem is now it can. And that sounds really good as long as you're the white, straight, middle-class, conservative, evangelical Christian, but not if you're different. Now, here's the reality. If we're honest about it, it's all aimed at two groups, gays and girls. It's all about stopping women's rights, abortion, and gay rights. Adoption agencies now have the right, according to this Religious Freedom Act, adoption agencies now have a reinstituted right to refuse anyone they feel is not a proper parent from adopting a child. That means now that certain agencies say that gay couples can no longer adopt. Single parents can no longer adopt. Couples who are not married can no longer adopt. Couples who have interfaith marriages can no longer adopt. Their religious beliefs are impacting how they perform their services to other people based on how they approve of someone else's lifestyle. Is that a right thing or a wrong thing for you? That's what I want you to reflect on this week, because as we go through this course, one of the things I want you to understand is that we all see religion a bit differently. We all see faith differently. It's not right. It's not wrong. It may be wrong for you, but it's how people understand their relationship with their divine in their world. And it help us to see with them with respect and integrity. I'll let you go. Have a great week. And by the way, in case there's any confusion in your mind, no self-respecting gay man would ever serve pizza at their wedding. Have a great week.